We're standing now on the eastern arm of McPherson Ridge on the first day's battlefield at Gettysburg National Military Park. You're looking west towards the western arm of McPherson Ridge, marked by the prominent white barn, and the South Mountain Range beyond. It would be in this field, and not far from where we're standing right now, that the Battle of Gettysburg would begin in the morning hours of July 1st, 1863. But I think it's important to remember that the American Civil War does not begin, nor does it end at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania in July of 1863. The American Civil War actually began in April of 1861, nearly 2 years before. And in the first 2 years of the American Civil War, by and large, most of the major battles that occurred in what's called the eastern theater of the war, that's everything east of the Appalachian Mountains, occurred about 120 miles south of us in the state of Virginia. There, in the first 2 years of the American Civil War, we have the two armies that will eventually wind up on this battlefield at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. One is the Union Army. It's called the Army of the Potomac. The other is the Confederate Army. It's called the Army of Northern Virginia. The Union Army is larger. It's better supplied. It's better equipped. The Confederate Army of Northern Virginia is often under strength. They're often ill supplied. Yet, in the state of Virginia, in the first 2 years of the American Civil War, it seems as though every time the Union Army of the Potomac faced off against the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia, despite the many advantages the Union Army had, the Union Army ended up losing. They suffered defeat after defeat after defeat. With each defeat, the morale of the men in that army is eroded. With each defeat, the men in the Army of the Potomac begin to lose faith in their generalship, in their leadership, some of them in the very cause for which they're fighting. By and large, the success the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia has in the first 2 years of the American Civil War is due in part to the great leadership that army had, primarily one man, Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee takes command of the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia in June of 1862 and goes on to lead it again to victory after victory. But by late May 1863, approximately 2 months before the Battle of Gettysburg, Robert E. Lee realizes he has a big problem and a big question. Lee's problem is this: he's won a lot of battles, but he hasn't won the war. He hasn't achieved Confederate independence. Not only that, he hasn't even driven the Union Army of the Potomac out of Virginia. His question is, what is he going to do next? How is he going to win the war? How is he going to end the war? And in late May 1863, Robert E. Lee will develop a very bold, a very daring plan. He intends to bring his army, 75,000 men strong, north through northern Virginia, across the Potomac River, through Maryland, and hopefully here to Pennsylvania. Now, Robert E. Lee knows this will be difficult, but he believes if he can get his army up here, it will accomplish a number of his objectives. First, Lee's betting that if he invades Pennsylvania, a northern state, a free state, the Union Army of the Potomac will follow him north. And what that means is if you're a Virginia farmer, you get a break. Perhaps you can plant a crop, harvest a crop, and that would be great for the Confederacy and for Lee's army. More importantly, though, Robert E. Lee believes that if he invades Pennsylvania, again, the Union Army will follow him up here. And then once the Union Army is in Pennsylvania, Lee will confront it in a battle and hopefully destroy it. And Robert E. Lee believes that one more great victory, one more decisive victory, this time in Pennsylvania, might convince the people of the North, who've already gone through 2 years of war, who've seen the casualty list grow longer and longer, that this war is unwinnable. And maybe in 1864, when Abraham Lincoln is up for re-election, the American people will vote in a new president, a president that will recognize the Confederacy and deal with the Confederacy on diplomatic terms. There is a tremendous amount at stake in the summer of 1863, and what we call the Gettysburg Campaign, or the Pennsylvania Campaign, begins on the 3rd of June, 1863, as Robert E. Lee's army begins to sidestep the Union Army and head north. By the end of that month, by the end of June, Lee's entire army is in the state of Pennsylvania. And by June 28th, Lee's 75,000-man army is stretched across south-central Pennsylvania in an arc stretching over 60 miles. There are Confederates to the west of Gettysburg, beyond the mountain range you can see in the background in the town of Chambersburg. More Confederates are due north, about 40 miles away, right outside the capital of Pennsylvania, Harrisburg. More Confederates are as far away as York, Pennsylvania, off to our northeast, again over 40 miles away. Confederates are gathering up food, they're gathering up supplies, they're causing enormous amounts of fear and panic across south-central Pennsylvania and even across the very north itself. Meanwhile, the Union Army, the Army of the Potomac, did exactly what Robert E. Lee anticipated. They began to follow the Confederate Army north. And on the 28th of June, the Union Army, 95,000 men strong, is based and encamped around the town of Frederick, Maryland, only about 35 miles south of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. On the night of June 28, 1863, Robert E. Lee himself is in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, again, across the mountain range you see behind me. As he's encamped in Chambersburg, he learns from a scout that the Union Army has crossed the Potomac River and they're not that far away. And now what Robert E. Lee has to do is get ready to fight the battle he sees coming his way. He sends out orders to all of his commanders, essentially telling them to stop their forward movement, to turn around and gather in the vicinity of the Gettysburg, Cashtown area. Now, the town of Gettysburg in 1863 numbers only about 2,400 people. It's a small town, it's a quiet town, and Robert E. Lee really doesn't care about the town of Gettysburg all that much. There's no shoe store or shoe factory in Gettysburg, as you sometimes hear. The one thing that Gettysburg has that Robert E. Lee really wants are roads. Gettysburg has 10 major roads that enter and exit the town. These roads go off in almost every direction on the compass. One road leaves Gettysburg, heads across the mountains to Chambersburg. Well, Robert E. Lee has men in Chambersburg. Another road leaves Gettysburg and heads north towards Harrisburg. Lee has men near Harrisburg. Another road heads off to York. Again, Lee has men in York. If you're Robert E. Lee, you can use the road network of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania to bring your divided, scattered army together again to get ready to fight the battle he sees coming his way. So imagine 2 days before the Battle of Gettysburg, this massive 75,000 Confederate army begins to move towards the town. Meanwhile, again, the Union Army of the Potomac is not that far away. They're around the town of Frederick, Maryland. They get a new commander the night of June 28, 1863, a 47-year-old Pennsylvanian by the name of Major General George Gordon Meade. George Meade will begin to push his army north, looking for Robert E. Lee, looking for the Confederate Army. He has to think both defensively, but also offensively. He has to go after Lee, but he also has to protect Washington, D.C. He has to protect Baltimore. On June 30th, 1863, 2,700 Union cavalrymen heading from the south, moving north, will arrive in the town of Gettysburg. They're commanded by a soldier named John Buford, a rugged, tough soldier with a good eye for ground. John Buford will see, coming down the Chambersburg Road behind me, moving towards the town of Gettysburg, a brigade of Confederate infantrymen. This brigade of Confederates is led by a soldier named Johnston Pettigrew. Pettigrew doesn't expect to find Union cavalry in Gettysburg. The last thing John Buford expected to see heading towards Gettysburg was Confederate infantry. Pettigrew will halt his advance in the road, he'll turn around, and he'll lead his column back to the base of the mountains, again, about 12 miles in the distance. Johnston Pettigrew will tell his division commander and his corps commander, General Henry Heath and General A.P. Hill respectively, that he encountered Union troops, the Army of the Potomac, in the town of Gettysburg. The next day, July 1st, 1863, General Harry Heath and about 7,000 Confederate infantrymen will head back down the road to Gettysburg to see what they uncover in the town.